What about supports? So part of the planning challenge is making sure that, English language learners are getting what they need. The kids who are below are getting what they need. Your kids who are dyslexic and who are struggling, just like all these different subgroups have got to get their stuff, and preferably in core instruction, not until they get to tier 2. So the question is that stuff baked into these programs, or is it like an addendum? You know what I mean? Like, is there a separate book for this and a separate book for that, or is it on the margins consider doing this, or is it part of the core instruction that's set up in the program?
In Wit and Wisdom, it's not part of the program. It's not included in the program at all. So that's one of those things where it's like, if you know as an instructional leader that you have kids that have dyslexia, or kids that haven't been diagnosed with dyslexia yet, but you see some signs. Kids who, whose home language is not a written language, right? So like our mom speakers. Kids who are African-American kids who may not have a strong academic English background, but have a strong vocabulary background. Like they're able to code switch and able to like figure some things out. That's not built in at all. So you have to kind of use your prior knowledge to figure out like, okay, how do I support teachers and kids with PD, with planning, with coaching. And then you have to have coaches who know these things too, right? If you're not able to spend money on PD from an outside source. So that's, that's huge for us too. If we're not able to get support from the publishers for a number of years, then you're spending site-based funds that could be used on books, that could be used on personnel, on outside PD.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's completely embedded into the curriculum. There's just so many scaffolds and differentiation within it. So there are pictures that come with like the words that would be really good for English language learners. We use sentence frames that are good for students, EL students, or just lower academically students. We use written and there's lots of charts, as you can see. Charts are a big thing with ELs. Yeah, and it just all comes with it. It's just all embedded into the curriculum, all these scaffolds, but it's still accessible to those students that are working at a higher level, because you can prompt them to write more or say more, but then there's these lower levels to help everyone. So I can think of 2 students that come to mind specifically. One little girl has an IEP, and then another little boy is an ELL. They both started out with little to no alphabet knowledge, like they didn't know the letter names or the letter sounds, like almost none. So they were put into the lowest group for differentiated instruction, which is called basic alphabet knowledge. They just did 1 round of that, and they moved up to the next group. So, I mean, the 1 round is 6 weeks. But if they don't pass that test at the end of the 6 weeks, they repeat that round. So the little girl has an IEP with a lot of accommodations, and then the little boy is ELL. They speak mostly Spanish at home. Parents don't speak English. And so they came into 1st grade with little to no alphabet knowledge. They didn't know letter names or letter sounds. So they started at the lowest level of the differentiated instruction group, and it's called basic alphabet knowledge. That group lasts 6 weeks. They did 1 round of that and then passed their test with flying colors and got to move up to the next group. And I just feel like that says a lot, because they have these other challenges. Being an English language learner is a huge challenge when you're learning to read another language. And then this little girl with the IEP, she has a ton of accommodations. And for them to only have to do just 1 round of that group, just the 6 weeks, because if you don't pass, you do it again, right?
Right.
But for them to just have to do that 1 time, come in with no knowledge, and then move to the next group, even with their challenges, I just feel like that really says something about the differentiated instruction curriculum and how well it works for every student at every level.
Okay, and what about English language learners?
In the sidelines, there's like teacher tips, and one of the main teacher tips is around ELLs. So like a lot of these are like suggestions, because they don't know which teacher or which context are picking up these manuals, but there's a deep dive for English language learners. Like, you might want to pre-teach these vocabulary words, or try this visual, or ask this question. So there are strategies and tips embedded. There's also like small group support suggestions for ELLs in the sidelines.
I'm wondering also, just like it has the ELL stuff, English language learners stuff on the side, like you might also want to consider this, or the pre-teacher's vocabulary.
Yeah.
I wonder about kids with, in thinking, does it work for kids with learning differences, whether they be dyslexic or what have you? Does it also have stuff on the side there, or is it just that's part of the regular core content?
I think it's part of the regular core content in that, like, they really do a good job of separating the two sides of like the simple view of reading, in which there's like one modality of like how you teach kids to read. And, like Nancy Young's ladder, that side of things with the structured literacy and the systematic approach is done through like SIPs and being a reader, that has a ton of support for dyslexic students or students with learning disabilities, because or differences, because it's like all paced. And the quote from Anita Archer that I appreciate is like, go as fast as you can, but as slow as you must. And it's so differentiated so that each kid masters. It's not about exposure for that side of the framework, it's about mastery, right? So like with those pieces of the foundational skills curriculum, all kids grow and move at their own pace in differentiated small groups. For the other side, like comprehension, vocabulary, content, knowledge, there's not a whole lot that you need to do so different. Conversation, and teachers give access and scaffolds to all kids because by the way that they explain, or their visuals, or like strategic grouping or partnerships. But the kids don't have to lift the words off the page themselves for that part of the day. So I know like a lot of dyslexic students are like so brilliant. They just get frustrated when they have to do the piece for lifting the words off the page, but have a dialogue with them and they can access the content, like give them the words to use and the structure in which to navigate the ideas, and they can do it. So I think what's difficult about curriculum in general is that size fits all way. But one side, like this structured literacy foundational, it's all structured literacy, but the foundational skills like needs to be differentiated and meet each kid where they're at and take them on the trajectory that works for them. And then the other side, like the ideas, the thinking, like you could do that in a totally different way. And too many times people try to do it together, and it's ideal if some of the concepts cross over, but it doesn't need to happen that way. This part can happen 20 to 30 minutes a day.
Right.
This part, all this rich, like juicy part of teaching, is the rest of your day, and doesn't have to be as like individually path guided.
That's a great question. I would say it does do again, EL is so well done. You can go onto the website and there's like a whole page for ELs, like English language learner supports or special education needs. And I absolutely think that it is a curriculum, because it prioritizes student voice and differentiation. It gives space and time to adapt to student needs. And when you have a curriculum provided for you, the teacher's think space is not on what text am I going to teach tomorrow, or how am I going to plan this lesson. The teacher's think space is on how can I differentiate for X student or Y student given their specific needs. Like that's how they're spending their energy. So it, like, because there's so much provided, it allows space for that differentiation.
With EL Ed, I don't feel like I can speak on that because we're only doing the virtual piece, right? There's a lot online. There's a lot, it's open source as well. There's a lot in those, in the resources that we have, but I know that our teachers haven't had that kind of time to dive into it yet, So I would wonder what it looks like, during summer planning, when we're getting closer to some semblance of in-person, and what that looks like for our kids and for our teachers.